I mean, we see a similar breakdown going on in the way that the Pharisees and the scribes use the law. Chapter 6, there's a couple passages here about the Sabbath. Now, the Sabbath is the Jewish day of rest. It's rooted in the first creation story in Genesis 1, in which God creates the world on the sixth day and rests on the seventh day. Right? God rests with creation on the seventh day. Very different from the stories that came, the early Babylonian stories, the Mesopotamian stories that existed before the Israelite story was born. You know, in the old religions, God created the humans to be as slaves, and when the gods finished creating the world, they had a party, and the humans were not invited. The humans were working for them as their slaves. So the Israelites changed that. They say, wait a minute, that's not how it goes. There's actually one God, and he rests with his creation on the seventh day, right? He wants us to be with him, and he wants us to also have a day of rest. And so the Jews did not work on the Sabbath. Now you can tell, like if you look at the story that this is rooted in, you can tell that this is something that is supposed to help people. It's supposed to give them a day of rest. And the Sabbath has been attributed as the reason that the Jewish people historically have had a higher rate of literacy, a much higher rate of literacy than other cultures. Because on the Sabbath, nobody works and everybody learns to read the Torah. It's time for family. You know, there's just so many benefits to this day off, right? And Jesus understands. That's the way all the laws from the law of Moses are. We can actually call them more accurately instructions, because they're instructions on how to be a community of loving persons. They're instructions on how to live a life that's good for you, spiritually and physically, in all ways. So remember, Loafing called the Torah a social project, right? It has a bunch of regulations and instructions that will help people form a community of loving persons, a free society, right? And not revert back into a community where people take advantage of and enslave each other in one form or another. So this is the whole backdrop to what the Sabbath is. And in this first section, the disciples and Jesus are walking through a field, and the disciples are just picking like little grains off the stalks and just popping it in their mouth and eating them. And I mean, it's just like, it'd be like unwrapping a piece of gum or something, you know, on the holy day for us. It's, I mean, I don't really know if you'd consider it, I don't think anybody would consider it work, you know, but the Pharisees, they're, you know, really into like following all the rules, because they think that by following all the rules, they're earning their salvation and they're the good people and they're going to get the rewards. And all these people who aren't as good at following the rules as them, well, they're not going to earn it and they're not going to find the salvation. They're not going to find deliverance and happiness, right? And so they attack Jesus and his disciples for just these putting the grains in their mouth, saying, well, that's technically working. You can't do it on the Sabbath. And, you know, Jesus, he just kind of comes right back at him. And he tells the story. He says, well, don't you know the story? Which they knew because it was from the historical books, the holy books of the Jews. And the story of when David was hiding out from King Saul before he became king, because Saul wanted to kill him. He hid in the temple, and the priest gave him some of the bread that was only supposed to be offered to God and then ate by only the priest, right? So here was a hungry guy, and he gave him bread. You know, he understood, the priest understood that the meaning, the symbolism of And the actuality of that showbread was offering a gift to God's people, right? I mean, the priests themselves were a sign and living symbol of um, the Israelites' devotion to the God who frees people from slavery over even tribal lines or territorial lines. And so he understood even the symbol of bread. When they bring the bread to the priest, that's a symbol for feeding that's a symbol for the way that God provides for his people. So when he had actually a hungry person, he fed him, right? The priest understood the meaning of the law. Even though he's technically breaking the law, he was actually doing what was good, right? He was following the meaning of the law there. And see, Jesus is really, it's kind of an extreme example. Like, really? You really think you're breaking the meaning of this law just by popping a grain in your mouth? And so he uses this phrase, the Son of Man is Lord of the Sabbath, right? Now, the Son of Man is the associated with the suffering servant of Isaiah. The person who has come to serve all, right, is the Lord of the Sabbath. In other words, it's not unlawful to help someone on the Sabbath. The whole point of the Sabbath law is to help people, right? So Jesus said, he was showing that Jesus understood that the religious laws were meant to help people love each other, care for each other, support each other, be like God, right? I mean, think about the 10 Commandments. Thou shalt not kill. Why shouldn't we kill each other? Because we're trying to create a society in which we love and help each other. That's why we don't steal from each other, right? See? All these things are supposed to help. The other story is that verses 6 to 10, or sorry, 6 to 11, where Jesus heals a man with a withered hand on the Sabbath. And the Pharisees, are thinking about it. And Jesus realized that they were going to, they saw what was going on, and they were trying to actually set it up so to see if he was going to heal this guy. And then they could say, look, he worked on the Sabbath. Right? So Jesus is just said, okay, like, yes, this is a good chance to, kind of bring this to light, call them out on this, so to speak. And so he heals the guy with a withered hand, and they accuse him of breaking the Sabbath law because he healed someone, right? I mean, this is so crazy. Like, I think sometimes I'm like, well, is this just an exaggeration? Would anybody really do that? But then I do notice people today do the same thing, right? They'll just have a religious teaching or law, and then they'll say, oh, you broke that law. You're an evil person. And you're just like, well, wait a minute. Aren't these rules and laws supposed to all be expression of the law of love? But that's the Pharisee mindset. And guess what? They had it back then, and people still have it today. It's when you use the religious laws to judge and exclude people. And then you miss the kingdom of heaven, because the kingdom of heaven is about including people whether they deserve it or not, just the way that God does. We love like God. We let our love shine on the just and the unjust alike. And that experience transforms those who can accept it. And we become generous and hospitable and unconditionally loving ourselves. And so Jesus says, is it lawful to do good on the Sabbath rather than evil? Right? Can you save a life on the Sabbath rather than destroy it? I mean, let's think of a modern parallel. We have a teaching in the Catholic Church that we should go to Mass every Sunday. Now, imagine if we're driving to Mass and you see your friend in a car who's been in an accident and they're injured and they need help. Are you just going to roll down the window and say, sorry, have to go to Mass? Right? How absurd would that be? What if you did that? You drive to Mass, and at Mass they would tell you to love your neighbor as yourself, right? I hope that they would at least read the gospel and read the Eucharistic prayers and all the stuff that tells us that. Hopefully you get it in the homily too, right? And they would teach you all about the way that Jesus loved and helped people. and that we should do it too, right? So in order to live out the meaning of that teaching, that we should go to Mass every Sunday, and the reason we do that is to gather together as Christ's body. It's an act of love in itself to come together with others like that. All the different people at our parish, or our church, or whatever. And here, be reminded, be formed into the people that reflect the hospitality and generosity of God. So if you have actually incorporate that, if that's become part of who you are, then you're definitely going to stop and help your friend, right? But again, this is typical of the Pharisees and the scribes, as generalized in the Gospel according to Luke. They do not accept God's open hospitality. They think it's wrong. You shouldn't just love everybody. They think, no, that person has to earn it. You can't just save everybody. It's only the people who qualify by following the law as good as I do. And so they're way off track, and they get these absurd interpretations in, where they're actually saying that Jesus was wrong to help somebody on a holy day, when all the holy day, when the holy day itself was intended to be a help for human beings.